I was 9 years old the first time I understood what it meant to be invisible in your own home. My older brother had just scored the winning goal at his soccer tournament, and my dad lifted him up on his shoulders right there on the field, laughing that big, full laugh that made everyone around him turn and smile. I stood at the edge of the grass, holding my brother's water bottle, waiting. My dad walked right past me to get to the car, not through me, past me, like I was a cone on a practice field. I told myself he was just excited. I told myself a lot of things for a long time. My name is Joanna. I'm 31 years old now. I run a company that manages commercial real estate acquisitions in the Southeast, and I have 11 people on my payroll. I say that not to impress anyone, but because for most of my life, the people who were supposed to be proudest of me would have laughed at the idea. Growing up, there were 3 of us kids. My older brother, whom I'll call my big brother, was the athlete. My younger brother was the funny one, the charming one, the one who could talk his way out of anything and into everything. And then there was me, the quiet one, the one who read too much, who didn't play sports, who spent Saturday mornings at the kitchen table doing math for fun while everyone else watched cartoons. My dad had a very specific idea of what success looked like. It looked like my big brother. It had his face, his build, his easy confidence. It talked about sports stats and stock tips and never, ever showed weakness in public. I didn't fit that picture. I never did. The first time I really felt it, not just sensed it, but felt it, the way you feel a door closing your face, I was 14. I'd been accepted into a summer business program at a university 2 states over. Competitive program. Maybe 40 students selected from the whole region. I saved the acceptance letter in the front pocket of my backpack for a week before I got the courage to show it to my dad at dinner. He looked at it, read it, set it down next to his plate. "That's good," he said. Then he turned to my big brother and asked how practice had gone. That was it. "That's good, not I'm proud of you." Not even a follow-up question. My mom saw my face. She reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. That quiet squeeze said everything she couldn't say out loud in front of him, and somehow that made it worse. Because it meant she saw it too. She'd always seen it. She just didn't know how to fix it either. I went to that program. I paid for half of it myself, using money I'd saved from babysitting the neighbors' kids every weekend for 2 years. My dad drove me to the bus station the morning I left, and he said, "Don't embarrass us." That was his send-off. Don't embarrass us. I didn't embarrass them. I finished top of my cohort. The program director wrote me a recommendation letter, so strong that my college applications practically wrote themselves. I also didn't tell my dad. I stopped offering him things to react to. It just hurt less. College came and went. I studied finance, worked 3 part-time jobs, graduated with honors and a network of professors and mentors who actually saw me. My dad came to graduation because my mom made him. He spent most of the reception talking to my uncle about football. When someone asked him what his daughter was planning to do next, he said, "She's going into business or something." Or something. I moved to Atlanta after graduation. I took an entry-level job at a property management firm, the kind where you're basically an assistant to the assistant, making copies and scheduling site visits and staying late to fix spreadsheets no one would look at until Thursday. I loved it. I loved every exhausting, underpaid second of it because for the first time in my life I was being evaluated on what I actually did. Not who I reminded someone of, not whether I fit a mold, just the work. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice. Within 4, I was running a small portfolio of commercial properties on my own. Within 6, I had enough client trust and industry knowledge to go out on my own. I started my company on a Tuesday in October, in my apartment, with a laptop, a bottle of sparkling water, and a business plan I'd been refining for 8 months. I named it after my grandmother, my mom's mother, a woman who'd built her own small business in rural Tennessee in the 1970s and never once asked anyone for permission. I didn't tell my family about the company for a year. I needed to know it was real before I handed it to them to react to. By the time they found out, through my cousin who'd seen my LinkedIn, naturally, the company had its first 5 clients and was profitable. My mom called and cried. My big brother texted a thumbs-up emoji. My younger brother called and asked if I was hiring. My dad said nothing, not one word. My mom told me later he'd shrugged when he heard and said, "Real estate, that's a tough market. That's a tough market." I put the phone down and sat very still for about 10 minutes, and then I got back to work. Because that was the only thing that had ever actually helped. The reunion was my mom's idea. She wanted everyone together. my dad's side and her side both, to celebrate my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. She'd booked a private room at a restaurant outside of Charlotte, where my parents had moved after retirement. Big round tables, catered food, a slideshow she'd made herself with photos from every decade of their marriage. I'd been dreading it for 3 months. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. I loved them in the complicated, exhausted way you love people who have known you your whole life and still somehow miss the point of you entirely. I loved my mom fiercely. I loved my brothers in the way you love people you grew up sharing a roof with. And my dad. I'd spent 20 years trying to stop loving my dad, and it had never once worked, which is its own particular kind of suffering. I drove up from Atlanta on a Friday afternoon, 6-hour drive. I stopped for coffee twice and spent most of the highway hours reminding myself to keep expectations low. The restaurant was warm and loud when I walked in. My aunts immediately pulled me into a group hug. My cousins were already 3 drinks deep. My younger brother found me immediately and made me laugh within 40 seconds, which was always his superpower. My big brother shook my hand like we were at a business meeting, which was his version of affection. My mom hugged me for a long time and whispered, "I'm so glad you're here." My dad was at the far end of the room talking to my uncle. He looked over when I walked in. He nodded. Then he went back to his conversation. Dinner was fine. The food was good. My mom's slideshow was genuinely sweet, and people cried at the right moments. My younger brother gave a toast that made everyone laugh. My big brother gave a toast that was probably written by his wife. And then my dad stood up. He tapped his glass, and the room got quiet. He's always had that effect on a room. Even now, in his late 60s, there's a gravity to him when he decides to take up space. Everyone looked at him. I folded my hands in my lap under the table. He talked about his marriage, about my mom, and how she'd been the best decision of his life, about the family they'd built. He got a little emotional, which was rare and genuine, and I found myself softening against my will. And then he said, "I want to say something about my kids." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I am proud of my sons," he said, "proud of both of them. One of them built a career, raised a family, showed up every time I needed him. The other one," and he smiled at my younger brother, "well, he keeps us laughing, and that counts for something." The room chuckled. "And then there's Joanna." He looked at me across the table. "I love her. She's my daughter and I love her. But I don't know what she does, exactly. Something with buildings? She never calls. She never comes home. She lives her little life down in Atlanta and doesn't seem to need any of us, so..." He shrugged. "I can't say I'm proud of what I don't understand." Silence. Not the polite silence of a pause. The silence of 30-something people absorbing something they wished they hadn't heard. My aunt started to say something. My mom's hand went to her mouth. My younger brother said, "Dad," in a warning tone that arrived about 30 years too late. I looked at my father for a moment, just looked at him. He looked back, and I saw something that surprised me. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't contempt. It was just blankness. He genuinely didn't understand what he'd done. He delivered what he thought was an honest accounting of his feelings and expected the world to receive it the way he meant it, and he would go to his grave not understanding why that wasn't good enough. I picked up my glass of water. I took a slow sip. I set it down. I opened my bag. I brought something with me to that dinner. I'd been carrying it around for 2 weeks, not knowing if I'd use it, telling myself I probably wouldn't. A single envelope, cream-colored with my father's name written on the front in my own handwriting. I slid it across the table to him. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I said. "This is for you." Then I pushed back my chair, kissed my mom on the cheek, and walked out of the restaurant. My younger brother found me in the parking lot 6 minutes later. I was sitting on the hood of my car, which was probably bad for the paint, and I didn't care at all. "Joe," he said. "I'm okay," I said. "What was in the envelope?" "He'll see." My brother sat down next to me on the hood. "He'll see." My brother sat down next to me on the hood. We sat there in the November cold for a few minutes, not saying much. He'd always been better at the quiet kind of comfort than the talking kind, which people don't expect from the funny brother. "You know he doesn't mean it the way it sounds," he finally said. "I know," I said. "That's almost the harder part." He put his arm around me and we sat there until I got cold enough to need to go sit in the car with the heat on. "What was in the envelope, you're wondering?" My company had been approached the previous spring by a commercial development group looking to expand their portfolio in the Southeast. Standard acquisition conversation. They wanted to buy several properties we managed, and they wanted to discuss a possible partnership arrangement for future projects. One of those properties was a mixed-use commercial building in a suburb of Charlotte. A modest building, 4 retail tenants on the ground floor, 6 office suites on the upper floors. Nothing flashy, but in a good location and steadily profitable. It had come to me through an unusual chain. My client, a retiree who'd inherited several properties and had no interest in managing them, had been looking to sell it quietly without going through a public listing. I'd bought it directly, restructured the lease agreements on 2 of the ground floor units, brought occupancy from 70% to 96% in 14 months, and added it to my management portfolio. I'd owned it for almost 2 years before I found out, purely by coincidence, that it was the same building that housed my big brother's accounting firm. He'd been a tenant there for 6 years. Suite 4B. His name was on the directory in the lobby. He had no idea the building had changed hands. Ownership had transferred through an LLC, as most of my acquisitions do. His rent payments went to a management account. He'd never had reason to look further. When I found out, I sat with that information for 3 months. I didn't do anything with it. I just sat with it. The way you sit with something you're not sure what to do with. And then my father gave his little speech at the anniversary dinner. The envelope contained a single page, a formal letter on my company's letterhead. It informed the tenant of Suite 4B, my big brother's firm, that the building had been under new ownership for 22 months. It included my name as the principal owner. It outlined the upcoming lease renewal terms, which I had deliberately kept fair and reasonable because I am not actually interested in hurting anyone. And it included a brief cover note in my own handwriting at the bottom. It said, "I understand the business you've built. I'm glad to have been part of supporting it even when no one knew. I hope you'll call me when you're ready to talk. Joe." I heard from my big brother at 7014 the next morning. He'd found the envelope after I left. He'd read it at the table, right there in front of everyone. He told me later that my dad had asked to see it too. And he'd slid it down the table without a word, and their father had read it very slowly and then set it down and said nothing at all for the rest of the evening. "You own the building," my brother said on the phone. It wasn't a question. "I do," I said. A pause. "How long?" "Almost 2 years." Another pause. "You let me keep operating there." You could have. "I know," I said. "That was never going to happen. You built something real." "I respect that." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad hasn't said anything this morning. He came down for coffee and just sat at the kitchen table." I looked out the window of my hotel room at the Charlotte skyline, pale and cold in the early morning. "That's okay," I said. "Joe, I didn't know. I know you didn't. I should have seen it. What you've built. I should have paid more attention." "You were busy," I said, and I meant it without any edge. My mom called an hour later, and she cried again, but differently than she usually cried. Not the soft apologetic crying she did when she wanted to smooth things over. Harder than that, like something in her had finally broken and she was letting it. "I never said enough," she said. "Mom. I never said enough to him about you. I should have." "You squeezed my hand at the dinner table when I was 14, I said. "I remember that. I've always remembered that." She cried harder at that, which I hadn't intended but somehow didn't mind. My dad called on a Sunday, 11 days later. I almost didn't pick up. I'd been on a call with a contractor and nearly let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. He didn't say much at first. He said he'd been thinking. He said he'd talked to my mom. He said he'd apparently been talking to the wrong people about the wrong things for a long time. "I don't know how to understand what you do," he finally said. "That's the truth. I don't know how to follow it." "I know," I said. That's not an excuse," he said. And from my father, in his late 60s, who had never once in my memory admitted to not having the right answer, that sentence cost him something. I could hear it. "I know, Dad. I looked up your company," he said. "Online. I read about some of the projects." I waited. "You've done well." A pause. "I mean it. I mean it. It wasn't, I mean it. It wasn't the speech I might have scripted for him in some other version of this story. It was a 68-year-old man reaching the edge of what his vocabulary had the capacity to say and offering what he had. "Thank you," I said. We talked for about 20 more minutes, about nothing much. His bad knee, the weather in Charlotte, a documentary he'd been watching about the history of the American highway system. It was the longest phone call we'd had in years. Before we hung up, he said, "You'll come to Christmas?" "Yeah," I said, "I'll come." I hung up and sat at my desk for a while. I want to be honest about what I felt because I think people expect a clean ending and I'm not sure I have one to give. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was tired and a little sad, and also something quieter underneath that. Something that might have been relief, or might have been the very early stages of something resembling peace. I hadn't done any of it to prove a point to him. That surprised me when I really examined it honestly. The company, the building, the years of work, none of it had been about making him recognize me. I'd stopped needing that around the time I was 24 and stayed late on a Thursday night to fix a spreadsheet no one would look at until the following week. I'd started doing the work because the work meant something to me, because I was good at it, because it was the only place in my life where the metric for success was clear and fair and mine. The envelope had been an impulse of the worst kind of tired. The kind of tired where you've been patient and gracious and have asked for nothing for so long that one small moment of witnessed cruelty pushes you past the border of yourself. But here's what I know. I don't regret it, not because it changed everything. It didn't. My family is still my family, complicated and imperfect and sometimes infuriating in the specific way that only people who've known you since before you had any agency over your own life can be. But something shifted. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where the music swells and everyone apologizes and all the years of hurt dissolve in a single conversation. Just a millimeter. Just enough to breathe a little easier at Christmas. Just enough for my dad to look at me across the table and see, maybe not fully understand, but see, that there is a whole person sitting there. I built my company in silence. I paid for the summer program with babysitting money. I graduated with honors without calling home about it. I bought buildings and managed portfolios and made decisions and solved problems, all without anyone in my family witnessing it. All without anyone saying, "I see you, I'm watching, I'm proud," and I turned out to be more than okay. That's not a tragic ending. That's actually the whole point. If you are the one in your family who was always told, not in words, maybe, but in shrugs and blank looks and doors walked through without acknowledgement, that you didn't quite measure up, that your version of success didn't count, that your way of moving through the world was somehow less than, I want you to hear this. You don't need their understanding to be worth understanding. You don't need them to read your resume to know that it's real. You don't need the person who missed your graduation to also witness your arrival. The arrival happens whether they're watching or not. It happened for me in an apartment in Atlanta on a Tuesday in October, with a laptop and a sparkling water and 8 months of work made real. The only one who needed to witness it was me. That was enough. That's always been enough. I've thought a lot about what it actually means when someone can't see you. Not won't. Can't. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to find it. For years I assumed my dad was choosing not to look, that he was looking at my brothers and then deliberately sliding his gaze past me, the way you skip a channel you've already decided you don't like. That felt like rejection with intention behind it. And rejection with intention is something you can be angry at, which is almost easier than the alternative. The alternative is that some people have a very small window through which they understand the world, and if what you're doing doesn't fit inside that window, it simply doesn't register. It's not malice, it's a limitation. And limitations, unlike choices, can't really be argued with or fixed by proving yourself hard enough. I spent roughly 15 years trying to prove myself hard enough. The summer program, the honors degree, the promotions, the company, all of it good, all of it real, all of it mine, and none of it ever going to be enough to move through a window that wasn't built to let it in. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of that anniversary dinner, is that the envelope wasn't about making my dad see me. I think I knew that even as I slid it across the table. It was about me finally stopping the performance. The performance of trying to need less than I needed, of arriving at family dinners with my expectations already packed down small so there'd be nothing to bruise. I'd been so disciplined about not needing his approval that I'd never fully admitted even to myself how much it had cost me to not have it. Every shrug, every "that's good" every time he turned back to my brother mid-sentence. Those things don't disappear, they stack. They become part of the structure of how you understand your own worth, and dismantling that structure takes longer than building it did. What I know about cause and effect, not fate, not some cosmic ledger, just the plain and observable truth of how actions accumulate, is this: the way you treat people becomes the lens through which they eventually see you. My dad treated me like a footnote for 30 years, and when the full chapter was finally read out loud, he was the one who didn't understand the story he was in. That's not revenge. It's just reality catching up. And what I want to say to anyone who recognizes themselves amiss, anyone who has been the one at the table whose accomplishments don't quite translate, whose way of moving through the world doesn't match the shape the family had already decided success should take, is that the work you do in private is still real. The standards you hold yourself to when no one is grading you are still forming something. Discipline practiced without an audience is still discipline. Intelligence applied without recognition is still intelligence. Showing up for yourself consistently over years when the people who were supposed to show up for you didn't, that is not a small thing. That is actually the whole thing. You don't need someone to open the envelope for the contents to be true.